Is everyone healthy aside from Jason?
So far as I know.
And you talked a lot about the offseason, obviously a ton of roster changes, changing the style of play to, adjust to the talent you have this year. What have you and Joe discussed in terms of, the new style of play and how you guys need to adjust to the new roster this year?
Well, my job and the front office's job is to put the roster together and then communicate the strengths of the individuals that we see. And then the coaches' jobs are to put styles, systems, et cetera, to maximize those strengths. So, I talk a lot more about what each person brings to the table. I think that we have a lot of guys that are unproven. And so with that comes great opportunity. And, the best way for them to really get to the point of being impactful players is to really soar with those strengths. And so making sure that we communicate well across our whole organization what we see as the value that each person can bring, and then letting the coaches do their job, which is create systems and styles and determine how best to maximize those strengths.
Brad, when you, I want to ask about Anthony. When you signed him, he's a proven scorer in the NBA, very aggressive. Did you see him bringing that same style here to Boston, or do you want to see him open up his playmaking abilities a little bit more here?
Well, obviously, we traded for him in the holiday trade, and he is an electric scorer. He's an outstanding shooter. He is a guy that teams will legitimately be thinking about when they enter the game, right? That's a scouting report asterisk guy, right? You have to know him inside and out because he's liable to go off. His passing has been pretty good throughout his career, and his ability to create and see. And so, you hope as a guy gets to be 26 years old now that, he continues to grow in all those areas. I think we're really going to challenge him to, be himself, number one, be aggressive, and, just try to grow and accentuate the people around him on both ends of the court.
Brad, you talked about earlier this summer how the second apron made a direct impact on the trades you guys made. You talked about how it's the front office's job to get new guys in and the coach's jobs to get the most out of them. When you're signing these new faces or making the trades for the specific players, how much of the balance is, finding guys who could fit on the court versus the future financial impact based on what happened this summer and what could happen in the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. We feel very fortunate that Anthony was included. And I said this when we traded for Niang. I think Niang's a really good player. But clearly that was more motivated by where we are in relation to the aprons and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's, anytime you're going through a period of retooling, there's going to be the chance of having guys that maybe you didn't think of as highly, but that's not the guys we've got. We got really lucky that we get a guy like Anthony who, we're really excited about having in our program. And so I feel good about that. We knew that there was going to be a lot of change. One of the, I think my biggest motivator was, because I knew we were going to end up losing super high character teammates, which, is really important to me, was that when we get back together, though younger and maybe not as experienced and maybe not quite as full of NBA wisdom, but we're replacing those guys with good character people as well. And I think that we've got a lot of people that are unproven, but a lot of really good people. And so I'm looking forward to seeing them grow and develop.
You talk about the unproven players. How conscious are you guys of the idea of finding guys on, maybe smaller contracts that can help, when Jason comes back eventually, or when you guys start
Yeah, that's every day, every discussion, hours a day, right? and that's always the case. That was the case the last couple years, right? When you get a chance to watch Josh Minot play significant minutes over a 2-week stretch, you try to take it because, that might be the kind of guy that's available in the summer. When Minnesota was missing Garza or was missing Reed or Gobert for a certain couple of weeks, let's watch Garza. We know that he's going to get opportunities here, and it'll be consistent and see what that looks like. I think it's funny, obviously we talk about this all the time as a front office. It feels like we spend all of our time talking about guys that are potentially minimum end of roster two-ways, right? Because Jason Tatum, we don't talk a lot about. Jaylen Brown, we don't talk a lot about, right? And I just think once you have that level of guy, you have to find any way to find guys that would accentuate around him.
Brad, as far as the front court, obviously that's where you guys have the most turnover. Neemias Queta had a pretty good Eurobasket run. What did you see from him in Portugal, or I should say in Latvia? And what do you kind of expect to see from him this upcoming season? What's the goals there?
Yeah, listen, it's the same thing. I think Nemi is still young in his development, young in his career in a lot of ways, but he's at a different place than he was when he first came into the league, and he was a two-way. And he's probably at a different place than he was when, even when he exited Sacramento a few years later. It's a good example of a guy that we were really excited about when he became available, because we had spent a ton of time talking about him if he ever became available a couple years ago, just because he felt like a guy that you could easily place into a group, and he'll play hard, he'll do what you ask, and he'll, give everything he has to make the team better. And I think he's improved his game. So, we'll see how that looks. I don't know how the front court's going to play itself out right now. I can't predict it. But he certainly has made great strides since he's been here, and and deserves an opportunity. And it's his to take advantage of.
Hey, Brad, NBC Boston and Telemundo. I know there's a lot of focus here on moving forward and working with the new guys. Taking just a quick step back, looking at Al Horford and what he meant for this team, his longevity here. Can you tell me if there was ever a possibility to keep him here, what the mindset, what the discussions were like, and do you expect him and hope that he would retire as Celtic?
First of all, those guys have the right to make decisions for themselves, especially when they're unrestricted free agents. Al, I've been here, when I was coaching, and flew down to Atlanta and was part of that group that tried to recruit Al to come here the first time. He left a couple years later, and then we were fortunate enough to get him back, right? So it feels like, even though there was a small interruption there, it feels like an unbelievable 8 years or somewhat of 6 years together, and 6 or 7 years together. And I just think he deserves to make whatever decision he wants. We offered both Al and Luke the opportunity to stay. But I think you can see where our contracts were with who we signed, that we were going to be handcuffed around the aprons a little bit. And I think that is part of the, we knew that there were going to have to be big moves. And then in addition to that, Luke played his way into a great opportunity and great contract, and we couldn't be more thrilled for him. Those phone calls are hard because you're not going to see those guys every day, but you're also jacked for them, to get a chance to do that. And then Al, same thing. We gave Al an offer, and but there wasn't any expectation that he wouldn't take a bigger offer elsewhere and go play, because that's his right, and that's what and he's been great for us, and we very much valued our time together.
John, B. Rob, and Jay. Brad, with the aprons kind of looming over kind of everything recently, how's that impacted the way you approach your job, evaluating who you might get? What kind of things are you looking for? You talk about unproven guys. What kind of things are you looking for in these unproven guys that make you think that they have a chance? Because missing now under the aprons is much more damaging than it used to be.
Missing on big contracts, right? because that's ultimately that's the key, right? Your big contracts have to be really good players. We're lucky that they are, right? And I think that I think one of the things that everybody's trying to do is find those guys on the lower contracts or entering the league, or for whatever reason on their second or third chance that might be on more team friendly contracts to accentuate those very best players. And again, I know I use that word a lot, but I think that we've had guys that are good examples of that come through, and we just have to have a couple of these young guys become that. I think Sam's obviously a great example of that. I think Nemi and Luke were great examples of that. Obviously, any of these drafted guys that then end up moving past their rookie deal, right? Then you're going to have to find guys that you can bring in either as free agents, two ways, draft, whatever. A couple of those guys have to become rotation guys.
Hey, Brad. What led to the timing of the Niang deal for you guys last month, and then with the signing of Chris, what kind of led you guys to him to feel like he could be a good fit for you guys here?
Well, we knew we were going to take 14 into the season, and obviously when you looked at, I like George a lot. That was a hard conversation to have because he's a Boston kid, and I think he would have loved to play for the Celtics. I think he's going to be happy in Utah. He's been there before, and he likes that. He likes people there and everything else. But yeah, I just think when you looked at it from the standpoint of where we were wing wise versus maybe where we were with a little bit more size and length, and then you added in that one guy made $8 million times whatever the tax was versus $2 million times whatever the tax was, or the minimum that counts as a 2.3 for us, then just made sense. Just made some logical sense. And we weren't going to take more than 14. So having the opportunity to get Chris at that time, wasn't going to be around forever.
Final two questions, Jay and Gary. You talked about all the good teammates you lost.
I can't find you.
I'm over here.
You're hiding back there like a good teammate.
Exactly. So you talked about all the good teammates you lost on top of all the production. Jalen called it like a new era with everything that's shifted. What are the most important parts of the foundation to carry over, and how much goes on the returning guys to get everybody up to the standard that you guys have operated the last few years?
Yeah, I think the returning guys have a lot on their shoulders. There's no question about it. I think that Jalen and Derek, Peyton, all of those guys, Sam, they have to lead by example, and they have to lead with their competitiveness, and they have to lead with their, with what they do best, right? And then I think there's huge benefit in having coaching continuity through this transition, because I think that, you also don't have coaches coaching the assistants to get them up to speed to coach the players, right? They can really help with that voice. And so I think the most important thing at the beginning of a season, and I know this sounds very elementary, but it is finding chemistry and really getting ready to compete and bringing your competitive best when the lights come on. And so I think that this group, with their off-season work, has shown a real desire to be in the gym, shown a real desire to be around each other and to get better. And but yeah, there's more on the guys with experience, and there's more on the coaches when you have a lot of new people to assimilate into the group.
Brad, maybe the first time in 10 years you guys aren't going to be picked to compete or win the East. Is there a part of you that is kind of motivated by the challenge of kind of rebuilding and retooling, and people overlooking the Celtics and saying, well, you and Indiana are going to drop because of the injury? Like, is there a part of you that's like, okay, yeah, do that, like overlook us and see what happens?
Yeah, I mean, my background was in the Horizon League, right, at Butler. When I first came here, nobody was picking us too much, and it took us a while to didn't take us as long to get back into the playoffs, but it took us a while to get back in the mix. And the one thing that I think that I'll never take for granted is being in the mix and having a chance. And as long as you've got the core that we have, then we have to do the very best we can to ultimately get to the point where we can compete at that level, right? That's our North Star. And so, yeah, there's no question there's motivation. I'm excited for the guys as a whole, but I'm really excited for the guys that are unproven. And I don't say that like when I say unproven, I'm not buying into any narrative of what they have been. We look at what they can do. And so can you take what they're capable of and make it an every night consistent thing? And when you have a chip on your shoulder, when you're competitive, and when you're motivated because you haven't gotten opportunities yet, some really good things can happen. And so I'm interested to see it. And you know, Gary, we're just going to evaluate it, you know, these first few months and see how it looks, see how it comes together. Be patient with the fact that we are getting some new guys together, but at the same time, you know, be very optimistic and, you know, not limit us and don't put a ceiling on us.